Your body is listening to every thought you think, and it's taking notes. The parable of the mustard seed, one of the shortest stories ever told, contains a blueprint for how microscopic internal shifts produce changes you can literally measure on a blood panel. Most people treat this parable as a nice metaphor about faith. They're missing the mechanism buried inside it. The story is deceptively simple. A mustard seed is one of the smallest seeds in the ancient world, barely visible between your fingers. Yet when planted, it becomes a tree large enough for birds to nest in its branches. Jesus used it to describe the kingdom of heaven, but the pattern he identified maps onto something modern research has spent decades confirming: disproportionate cause and effect. A shift so small you'd dismiss it, an outcome so large you'd assume it required something dramatic. Consider what happens inside your body when a single belief changes. Researchers at Harvard conducted an experiment with hotel housekeepers. One group was told their daily work already met the Surgeon General's recommendations for an active lifestyle. The other group received no such information. Same job, same physical labor, same number of calories burned. 4 weeks later, the informed group had lower blood pressure, lower body fat, and lower waist-to-hip ratios. The only variable was a belief about what their existing activity meant. That's a mustard seed moment. A tiny cognitive reframe, what I'm already doing counts, produced measurable biological change in under a month. The housekeepers didn't exercise more. Their bodies responded to what their minds decided was true. And this pattern keeps showing up in places that make strict materialists uncomfortable. Placebo research has moved far beyond sugar pills and subjective pain ratings. Studies at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center showed that placebos can work even when patients know they're taking placebos. Open-label placebos, where the doctor literally says, "This is a sugar pill with no active ingredient," still reduce symptoms in irritable bowel syndrome patients by nearly twice as much as no treatment. The belief wasn't, "This pill contains medicine." The belief was smaller than that. Something closer to, "I am in a healing context, something is being done." A mustard seed of expectation, enough for the body to start reorganizing. So why does something this small produce something that large? The answer lives in how biological systems amplify signals. Your body runs on cascading feedback loops. A single thought pattern, repeated, alters the chemical environment your cells sit in. Cells respond to that environment by activating or silencing specific genes. This field, Epigenetics, has shown that environmental signals, including internal ones generated by your own mental state, can toggle genetic expression like a dimmer switch. One study published in Psychoneuroendocrinology tracked experienced meditators through an intensive day of practice. By the end of a single day, they showed measurable changes in gene expression related to inflammation and stress recovery. One day, the genes were always there. The sequences hadn't changed. The volume knob moved. Picture that mustard seed again. It already contains the entire tree, root system, branches, the capacity to house birds. The seed doesn't acquire treeness from the soil. The soil activates what was already encoded. Your genome works the same way. You're carrying thousands of genes that are currently silent, waiting for the right signal. A sustained shift in belief changes the signal environment, but the parable specifies something most people skip over when they read it casually. The seed has to be planted. It has to go into the ground. Holding it in your palm and admiring its potential produces nothing. This is where the parable diverges from wishful thinking and aligns with what behavioral science actually shows. Belief alone, held abstractly, changes very little. Belief expressed through a specific, repeated action, planted in the soil of daily behavior, that's where the cascade begins. B.J. Fogg's research at Stanford demonstrated that the minimum viable behavior change can be absurdly small. 2 push-ups after using the bathroom. 30 seconds of meditation after pouring morning coffee. The action itself is almost irrelevant in size. What matters is the identity signal it sends. Each repetition is a vote. I am someone who does this. The mustard seed isn't the action. The mustard seed is the moment you decide the action means something about who you are. And here's where the growth pattern gets interesting. The parable doesn't describe linear progress. A mustard plant doesn't grow 1 centimeter per day in a straight line. It pushes through soil in the dark for days with 0 visible progress. Then it breaks the surface. Then it accelerates. The growth curve is exponential. Agonizingly slow at first, then suddenly everywhere at once. Behavioral change follows the same curve. Researchers call it the plateau of latent potential. You change a belief, start acting on it, and for weeks, sometimes months, nothing visible happens. Your friends don't notice. The scale doesn't move. The bank account looks the same. This is the underground phase. The root system is forming. Most people quit here because they evaluate the seed by the size of the tree they can see, and they see nothing. The ones who persist aren't working harder. They've internalized a different timeline. They understand that the instruction was to plant the seed, water the ground, and wait, with the specific understanding that the waiting period looks like failure from the outside. The parable is surprisingly honest about this. It doesn't promise instant trees. It promises that the smallest seed in the garden becomes the largest plant. The word becomes carries years inside it. There's a physical correlate to this underground phase that most people have never heard of. When you begin a new thought pattern or behavior, your brain builds temporary neural connections. Fragile ones. They're like footpaths through tall grass. Use them once and the grass springs back. Use them daily for a few weeks, and the path becomes visible. Use them for months, and your brain starts myelinating those pathways. Myelin is a fatty sheath that wraps around nerve fibers and increases signal speed by up to 100 times. The thought that once required conscious effort becomes automatic. The behavior that felt forced becomes identity. The mustard seed has become a tree, and birds nest in it. The parable includes that detail for a reason. Once the internal shift has grown large enough, it starts attracting external results that match it. Opportunities you wouldn't have noticed before. People who respond to you differently because your body language, your word choices, your micro-expressions have all shifted to match the new internal architecture. You didn't chase those birds. They came because the tree was there. Critics will point out that positive thinking movements have made promises like this for over a century, and most of them are nonsense. Fair. The shelves are full of books claiming you can think your way to a mansion. The parable makes a more constrained claim. It says the smallest amount of genuine belief, the size of a mustard seed, is sufficient. The operative word is genuine, a belief you actually hold, expressed through action, planted in behavioral soil. The parable isn't describing visualization, it's describing cultivation. The difference matters because cultivation involves contact with reality. A farmer plants a seed and then responds to weather, pests, drought. The belief doesn't override the environment, it interacts with it. Your small shift in self-concept doesn't magically rearrange external circumstances, it changes how you respond to them. And response patterns, compounded over months and years, reshape the trajectory of a life so completely that the starting point becomes unrecognizable. Think about someone you know who changed dramatically over 5 or 10 years, got healthier, or built something, or became someone you barely recognized from who they were before. If you ask them to identify the turning point, they'd almost always name something small. A conversation, a sentence in a book, a single morning where something clicked. A mustard seed. They rarely name the tree, because the tree grew so gradually it felt like it was always there. The parable has lasted 2,000 years because the pattern it describes keeps proving itself in laboratories, in longitudinal studies, in the lived experience of anyone who has ever sustained a change long enough to forget it was once a decision. The smallest seed, the largest tree, and the long invisible phase in between where most people lose faith, which, if the parable is right, is exactly the resource that was required all along. Your body is still taking notes. The question is what you're writing.